So we're moving on now, and we're going to switch topics to focusing on the breath, leveraging your core into a game-changing business. And we're very fortunate to have with us a moderator, Christina Farr, who's the editor and host of Future Review on KQED, and also Charles Michael Yim, CEO and co-founder of Breathometer. So please come on up.
So now's the point in the afternoon where we get to talk about booze and bad breath.
Awesome start.
Yep. So Breathometer. I haven't heard a ton about you guys since the infamous Shark Tank appearance. Can you give us a little bit of an update on what products are on the market now and what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of the company. I started it roughly about now 2.5 years ago. And we came to the market with the world's first alcohol smartphone breathalyzer product. Quickly, about a year after, we released kind of a second generation version of it. And it offers all these kind of premium features and what have you. But we're quickly moving and crossing over into true medical. So a lot of people don't know, but just as a background, breath can be used for a multitude of things. There's roughly about 300 biomarkers. And essentially, we started off with alcohol because it was a very well understood market. And now we're moving into not just bad breath, but oral health and hydration. That's mint. And now we're working on other kind of more medical focused things like asthma, diabetes, and ultimately lung cancer.
And you were showing mint just outside.
Right.
You just blow on it and then it tells you if you've got terrible breath and should brush your teeth?
Yeah, actually, to be more specific, it actually measures the level of hydrogen sulfide or volatile sulfur compounds off your breath. And merely bad breath is a byproduct of bacteria buildup or bacterial biofilms in your oral cavity. So essentially, if you guys want to test it out, our table's right outside. We can demo it for you. But nevertheless, we can tell you how much hydrogen sulfide is emitted from your breath, and ultimately, yeah, how dirty or ultimately how clean your oral cavity is.
Sounds like the right thing to do before a date.
It's funny you mentioned that. We're going to be targeting the dating demographic.
Partnerships with OkCupid and
OkCupid, Match.com, right?
Are you serious?
Yeah, dead serious. Yeah.
Wow.
Serious as
Okay.
cancer. Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of the homework that we've done, there's a very nice kind of overlap between consumers that would purchase an alcohol breathalyzer versus, say, a oral healthcare product. Yeah.
And with the alcohol breathalyzer, is this kind of more of a novelty product where it's something that consumers would buy online, or are you hoping that you can tap into, say, the employer market? I mean, do they have a vested interest in making sure we're not driving home drunk?
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting, right? If you take alcohol, right, I think we've maximized kind of our penetration into the market in that it not only just focuses on whether you're safe or not to drive, but being able to measure and essentially quantify how often you're drinking and the frequency of it. So now in terms of mint, we see a huge opportunity in, say, Europe, and as well as South America, and as well as Asia. And actually, it's funny, it originated in Japan and also in Korea. So they're pretty strict about it, but we're going to be making an announcement with
What do you mean they're pretty strict about it?
They're strict in that it's part of their culture. They're tech savvy, and oral hygiene is extremely important. And so anyhow, we'll be partnering with the #1 oral healthcare company in the world. We'll make the announcement in the following weeks. But basically, think of a ultrasonic toothbrush, but if it was literally packaged with it and distributed like across the world. So it's very much actually a very serious product. And what I say is, how I view it is, basically oral health is the window to your overall health. And so it's a very legitimate medical device. In fact, it's a Class 1 device. So we've been working with the FDA to make sure that we're adhering to the regulations.
So what's it been like, this journey from starting out with Shark Tank and Mark Cuban to now the FDA? I mean, how did that happen, and what's the difference between the two? I mean, are you finding that they're equally hard audiences to please?
They are, right? It's funny, I think Shark Tank could be a blessing and a curse initially, being that, I mean, this is my third company. I've built and sold my last two, and when I was on Shark Tank, a lot of people, up until now, I would say, Shark Tank was taken only so seriously, but now that they have really high quality companies, I think the tone has kind of changed. And then when I crossed over and now really, fundraising for essentially what is a digital health like a medical device platform, it can be quite hard because you're dealing with hardware and you're also dealing with medical. And there's very an acute amount of VCs in the Valley that, that are willing to play in that game. And obviously digital health is kind of heating up just now, and I think we're still at the tip of the iceberg. But crossing over, it's funny, we're moving into a new office, and it's got a white or clean room, and it's got a legitimate lab and what have you, but you can see the evolution of the company where I started initially as a consumer electronics company, and then crossing truly over to medical, whereby...
And why make that jump, in the first place? Why not stay in the computer electronics kind of space?
I think in terms of my heart, and just as the founder of the company, I've created some cool companies, but I think to be able to truly revolutionize digital health or healthcare, to have that potential, that's what excites me, and that's where the bigger opportunity is. So yeah, we could have stayed in CE for the longest time, but if you can start mapping out biomarkers and start doing early detection of lung cancer, prostate, kidney failure, things of that, of that type of thing. So I think that's exciting for me, and it provides the opportunity to essentially leave a legacy, right, and change people's lives on a day-to-day basis. So.
Yep, and I've seen a couple companies before that have come along and said, we can do amazing things with the breath. We can potentially detect certain kinds of cancer, and that blew my mind. But I haven't really. I assume these companies have shut down because I haven't heard from them in years. So you're not the first in the space.
Right.
Can you just give us like an idea of where we are now with that science, and is it ready to commercialize? And did these companies in fact kind of shut down?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, just as some background, things like lung cancer, right? It's possible. For instance, there's basically a clinical trial that's being done with dogs in the UK. Being that I know you're from the UK, so essentially
hard to tell there,
right? But you can essentially detect with 99.9% accuracy rate. So the whole kind of concept is, if a dog can do it, why couldn't we create basically an e-nose, an electronic nose? And so companies like Adamant Technologies, to be specific, they were backed by Khosla. They're around for about 3 years. They're funded $5 million. The problem with, I think, companies like that and where they shut down is that they go straight into medical. And you have to adhere by all these medical regulations and what have you, and typically that's a class 3 device. So what happens with a lot of companies or startups, they fail because they run out of money. And so there was very much strategy around developing a breath analysis platform whereby we started with alcohol, we're about to break even and be profitable, we're moving into oral healthcare, but we're inching closer and closer to true medical devices that can be life-saving. And I think that in terms of a strategic kind of entry point into the market, and just roll out of the company allows us to build the brand, capitalize, develop the R&D relationships that we need, and extend gradually as opposed to going straight for something so challenging as lung cancer.
That's good advice.
Yeah, but to your point, it's very real. We're partnered with Cleveland Clinic and Stanford University. Cleveland Clinic arguably has the #1 breath analysis lab in the world. In fact, Dr. Wright Dwight is a luminary in the breath analysis space, and even with basic semiconductor sensors, they're able to nail down lung cancer with roughly about 90% accuracy right now. We're working with state-of-the-art electrochemical sensor technology, and now creating what is really a mini gas chromatography machine that's going to be so tiny they can fit in the palm of your hand. So we can measure an array of biomarkers, not just one. So we're really playing around with singular analyte type devices, but it'll become more advanced as we obviously evolve as a company.
And how do you envision this working? Would it be that anyone in this room could take this test and see whether they have cancer and don't know it, or is it for patients that have already been diagnosed to find out something more specific about the disease? Yeah,
sure. So this is kind of a use case played out in my head, but longer term vision for me is essentially, say if you're a smoker and you did your annual physical exam, you take a simple breath test, in 5 seconds you know basically whether you're in the early or later stages of lung cancer, because you can break down each biomarker based on concentrations. And the higher concentrations, like for instance, it's been defined that toluene is mapped out to lung cancer particularly. So there's quite a bit of evidence and scientific studies done around that. But depending on the concentrations, for instance, of toluene, can we understand like how far along are you or how disastrous is it? So.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty far along.
And you mentioned that there are, did you say 130 biomarkers?
300.
300 biomarkers.
Yeah.
Now, how many of those are actually useful from a potential R&D perspective?
So far from what we know, at least 25%. And so what's very useful in what we're using now are single analyte, right? So couple of other key ideas like ketones. We can detect ketones off your breath real time. Up until now, nutritionists and dietitians really have been using ketone strips, the urine strips. Obviously, it's invasive, and over prolonged periods of use, they become fairly inaccurate. But still, nutritionists and dietitians use that today because it's still the best of breed application out in the market, but not for long. We hope to change that. So, but roughly, we're saying about 25% are applicable. So we're again going back to we're just scraping the tip. It's just the tip of the iceberg. So.
Okay. And at a certain point, we're not talking about breath anymore. We're talking about saliva, correct? Are you doing any research around saliva and what can be done there?
Yeah, that's been a part of some of our board and our investor discussions, and also from our strategic advisors. Since we're already playing around with the oral cavity of the mouth, why don't we go one step further and start correlating essentially specific biomarkers through saliva? And we have considered it. We are considering it. But two primary fields or applications could be epilepsy and also concussions. So a use case I think I was giving you earlier is if you're an NFL player or maybe you just do extreme sports, you got obviously tackled relatively hard, you put a saliva strip in your mouth, boom, if there's an enzyme being released and it gets released into your obviously your saliva, and we can tell right there that, hey, you actually had a minor concussion, that could be extremely impactful, right? So we are considering that. And to note and add to that point, a lot of people don't know, but close to 99% of your breath that's emitted actually is coming from your environment. So the same sensors we're using, again, state-of-the-art, co-developed by some NASA technology, essentially can be used for environmental kind of conditions. So think about pollution, methane, things of that nature. So we're also exploring that as well. So it's funny, the initial vision of the company started with breath, an alcohol breathalyzer, but as you evolve, similar to like Mark Zuckerberg when he came with Facebook, it was merely supposed to be an online platform. And as I've spoken to him, it evolved over time. And I'm not gonna lie, it initially started with a smaller opportunity, but the more we dug into it, I realized, whoa, there's a huge opportunity here. And really what this company is not a CE company, it's truly a medical device platform.
I definitely want to come back to you on the sort of marketing and branding issues of how you kind of pivot and sort of change effectively what you're doing with this company and build more products. But I think now we should definitely talk about sensors, because it sounds like you're relying on some really sophisticated biosensors. A lot of companies in this room are likely doing the same. How are you finding the talent, especially given that we've got companies like Apple and Google, also playing in this space? And are you all kind of fighting for the same small pool?
Yeah, so we're fortunate in that we're in such a very niche market. And for instance, we talk about digital health. A lot of people automatically start thinking about like the Fitbits of the world, right? Trackers, what have you. I think in that market, there's quite a bit of tough competition. But when you talk about either one of two, it's primarily breath analysis or analyses expertise. That's what we're looking for. That doesn't come top of mind, and that's not everybody. They're very specialized. So to speak about Adamant Technologies, right? When I was looking for a head of R&D, I was looking for someone that was already working at a breath analysis company. So that happened to be Tim Ratto, who's now our VP of R&D. And then we're also essentially consuming a majority of the talent from our competitors. So I was kind of mentioning.
So as they fail, you're swooping in.
Or before they even fail, I'm swooping in and offering them the opportunity to literally commercialize technology versus still only remain to be an academic house. There's a huge difference between taking what is R&D and just continuing to do studies and do all these reports, but versus actually truly taking that to market and commercializing that. Hence why we're working with Cleveland Clinic. They basically communicated the level of frustration with us in that, hey, we have all this breath analysis like research, but we've had not one partner that we've been able to ever essentially tackle and bring essentially our technology into the market. And so because we're a lighter, more agile startup, we can do it, and we have done it. And we're in a very heavy, significant execution company. And I think that's a big difference between a lot of these digital health startups and whether or not they're going to fail or they're going to make it. But in essence, to your point, is we're acquiring our talent from competitors, and that's how we're kind of cannibalizing the market.
And you're in the midst right now of kind of thinking about devices that may go through the FDA approval process. You're sort of in a minority among Silicon Valley digital health entrepreneurs, many of whom stay very much in the wellness category, and they avoid the FDA. Would you advise those people to sort of change their course and perhaps think more about clinical applications that would need to be regulated, or is that process as difficult as they say?
Yeah, it definitely is difficult, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with the FDA in terms of the various medical device grades, right? So there's class 1, 2, 3. I didn't know it, but going into it, again, when I was building my device, I didn't realize it was even a medical device, but it's a class 1. And for the ones that probably know in this room also, even
mint,
for mint and also for breeze, for alcohol. And what's interesting, a lot of people don't know, but like even a toothbrush is a medical device class 1. But it only requires registration approval. When you start actually gradually stepping through to say class 2, class 3, class 2 requiring a 510K, that's kind of our asthmatic product that we're starting to prototype. And then class 3 is really life-threatening, type application. So lung cancer, diabetes, that takes clinical trials, that takes years of substantiation. And especially if you don't have any real predicate devices to leverage, it could be a very long drawn out process. And that's a difference of strategically, do you want to live or die? So for us, luckily, our initial kind of consumer roadmap, they're all class 1 devices. So we can march to the market very quickly. And within less than 12 months, we are already generating revenue. This is our second year really, and we'll be essentially almost close to break even, if not profitable. So certain medical companies, I don't think they have a choice, right? I mean, those you've got to raise a ton of money, you need all the talent, and it's an extremely high risk play. But for the companies that potentially could be a little bit more creative or unique, I would stress, go for the class 1 devices, go for the class 2, but do not go for the class 3 if in fact you can actually avoid it. So for us, it was a very strategic, very tactical decision.
And would you advise that any entrepreneurs in the room go on Shark Tank?
Oh, it's funny. They removed what was the 5% ownership clause because Mark Cuban, demanded it. Otherwise, he would walk off set. And so, anyway, Mark Burnett and Sony, heard him loud and clear. And so when they removed that, what happens is from season 5 onward to now season 7, they're filming right now actually in Hollywood. You have these tremendous, super high quality companies. And in fact, I'm now getting a lot of deal flow personally, and I have a lot of people that I'm kind of advising, but we have a ton of digital health, a lot of economy sharing based startups that are now going straight to Shark Tank. My belief is it's actually probably the most powerful VC in the entire world. It gives you instant credibility, legitimacy, exposure, obviously funding if you can get it, and it continues to reward you over time. It's millions of dollars of marketing within like minutes, and so I would highly recommend it if it's the right fit. Obviously, if you have a consumer product, it's even better because it's a consumer audience. But it's the @1 Emmy Award-winning show, and I'm hearing a lot of families that stay in on Friday nights with their kids and they eat some pizza, and it's a great educational show. So very much, you're delighting the world while you're building potentially something fascinating or innovative.
And when you finally did get your device out onto the market, I believe you raised some crowdfunding as well.
Yep.
How were you dealing with kind of some issues around accuracy?
Sure.
Because what you're doing is you're basically telling someone what their blood alcohol level is, and what if you're a little bit off and someone decides to drive? I mean, was that sort of keeping you up at night?
Not any longer. When we came out with our first product, our first gen product, and which is still in the market, and it's selling pretty successfully, we use off-the-shelf components. I literally built it in my garage. I brought my brother in with me. He was one of the original engineers that did Beats by Dre. So, he knew the hardware, I knew the software.
Did you guys drink a bunch of beers and then try it out?
No, that was the little brother. But no, on a serious note though, we were using all the off-the-shelf components, a very generic semiconductor sensor. But then, basically I went to CES, started doing some real due diligence, and I found out there was a cutting-edge, kind of leading-edge biosensor company that focused not just on environmental air, but also on breath analysis. So we exclusively partnered up, and now we're developing co-IP. But point is, now we're using state-of-the-art electrochemical sensors that have a super tiny footprint, low power consumption, as high as resolution as parts per billion. And if we can get into the parts per trillion, the accuracy rate goes from 90 to 100%. But as it relates to the most recent addition, our flagship product, it's law enforcement grade accuracy against a $5,000 police machine, and it literally tees up perfectly. So that's very key in that we had to adhere to that standard. Now we can cross that standard, and basically phase it into every single application moving forward.
Great. And one last question: Are you, and this relates to branding?
Yeah.
Are you considering changing the name, given that now you're thinking about saliva and you're thinking about applications for lung cancer and so on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've had quite a few good discussions with our board and also our investors, and I think that question lies in the future of the company. In that, could we move into saliva? Will we move into environmental ambient sensing? We have a very large future ahead of us. And if that happens, I don't think that the smart move would be to eliminate or change the name of Breathometer. I would say the smart move would be able to create a parent company and then wrap Breathometer as a subsidiary within that parent. And so if there's a saliva-based business, if there is essentially a environmental air sensing business, so be it. But Breathometer has become and resonated with the audience, with the public market, relatively strong. So we hope to keep that and and create a legacy with it.
Great. It's been wonderful chatting with you. And
it's been a pleasure.
We're all going to go apply to Shark Tank now.
Good luck. Good luck. Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Charles.